Hi, my name is Leticia Nogueira. I'm a researcher at the American Cancer Society, and today I'll tell you about climate change and cancer. Hurricane Harvey was when climate change and cancer collided for me. I was working at the Texas State Health Department at the time, and I was able to see firsthand the impact that climate-driven disasters can have on communities. Let me explain. Climate change alters the behavior of extreme weather events. Warmer air holds more water vapor, which increases the water capacity of hurricanes. And we could see this with Harvey. Here we have a map from NOAA showing rainfall over Houston during Harvey, and NOAA had to add new colors to the legend because it had never rained so much in one spot before. Now, here's the thing, this was not the first time that Houston had been impacted by a hurricane. The hospitals thought they were prepared, they all had backup generators, but Harvey was different. It stalled over Houston, then it rained, then it flooded, then the backup generators flooded. Extreme weather events can damage medical infrastructure, break transportation links, disrupt supply chains, and interrupt access to medical care. And the changing frequency and behavior of extreme weather events is making it harder for communities to prepare and respond to increasingly unpredictable circumstances, which is especially concerning for medically vulnerable populations who rely on uninterrupted access to care, such as cancer patients. Soon after working on the response to Harvey, I joined the American Cancer Society, and the very first project I proposed was to evaluate the impact of hurricanes on cancer patients. And when I said that, people started laughing. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to be discouraged from leaning on your lived experiences when proposing efforts on this topic. As more and more of us are personally exposed to climate-driven disasters, the expertise that we gain from these lived experiences is exactly the type of knowledge that we need to tackle such a rapidly evolving crisis. It took some convincing, but in the end, we did run this study and found that lung cancer patients whose facility was impacted by a hurricane during their radiation treatment had worse survival than similar patients who were treated at the same facility, but at a time when no disasters happened. But disruptions in access to care was not the only health consequence of climate-driven disasters I witnessed while working on the response to Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey's unprecedented precipitation, which climate change made 3.5 times more likely to happen, flooded chemical plants, oil refineries, and Superfund sites that released a lot of carcinogens into the Houston community. And because I was familiar with cancer clusters in the area, another connection between climate change and cancer became obvious to me. And that's that our reliance on fossil fuels is a shared cause of climate change and an increasing exposure to carcinogens. Once you realize this, one of the first examples that might come to mind is lung cancer and air pollution from vehicle emissions. The same air pollution that's driving the greenhouse effect also increases lung cancer risk. However, extracting, processing, transporting, and waste management of fossil fuels all release carcinogens in communities before and after they are consumed. Take fracking, which is used to extract natural gas, for example. In addition to the methane that is released at the wells, the compressor stations can release fine particulate matter, benzene, formaldehyde. Then there is the waste that flows back up a fracked well, which also contains carcinogens and is transported by diesel trucks to injection wells, where they can then contaminate water sources. After extraction, there is processing. I mentioned Hurricane Harvey flooded several Superfund sites. These are just super contaminated sites that require government funds to be cleaned up. And a quick search of existing Superfund sites will help you understand just how much fossil fuel processing contributes to an increasing exposure to carcinogens. Every other Superfund site used to be an oil refinery. Another example of how our reliance on fossil fuels increases risk of exposure to carcinogens is during transportation. You might remember seeing in the news about the Ohio train derailment. The train was carrying vinyl chloride, which is a petrochemical used in plastic production and also an established Group 1 carcinogen. We don't have time today to talk about the dirty details of every single step of the fossil fuel infrastructure, but I believe you see enough to understand that each component here releases greenhouse gases that are contributing to climate change, but also releases carcinogens in communities, which is hindering our cancer prevention efforts. And then, because climate change alters the frequency and behavior of these extreme weather events, when disaster strikes, communities can be exposed to even higher levels of these carcinogens, such as what happened in Houston during Harvey. And these climate-driven disasters can also result in disruptions in access to care. So climate change impacts every step of the cancer control continuum, including survivorship, because individuals who have been diagnosed with cancer are a vulnerable population to the health hazards of climate change due to the physical, psychological, and socioeconomic consequences of cancer diagnosis and treatment. The physical and psychological consequences listed here, for example, can lead to increased sensitivity. Some cancer treatment drugs can inhibit thermoregulation, making it harder for us to regulate our body temperature and increasing our vulnerability during heat waves. A weakened immune system also makes individuals more vulnerable to infections, which are common during flooding events. And cardiorespiratory issues, which are common consequences of cancer treatment, can increase vulnerability to wildfires. In a recent study, we used NASA satellite data to evaluate the association between proximity to a wildfire and survival among lung cancer patients. We chose to use NASA satellite data instead of on-the-ground air quality monitors because proximity to wildfire goes beyond exposure to air pollution and includes the stress associated with potentially having to evacuate, water and soil contamination, threats to property and life, and these are present no matter which way the smoke plume is blown. And here again, we found worse survival among patients who were exposed to a wildfire, showing how cancer patients are a vulnerable population to the threats of climate change. In summary, there are three pathways through which climate change impacts cancer risk and outcomes, and it all starts with polluting human activities. They are causing climate change, but also increasing exposure to carcinogens. Then climate change alters the frequency and behavior of extreme weather events, which can in turn lead to disruptions in access to care. Finally, cancer diagnosis and treatment have physical, psychological, and socioeconomic consequences that increase vulnerability to climate hazards, our third pathway, all of which can come together and result in worse cancer risk and outcomes. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are things that each one of us can do to change this. Because in the end, we all have three choices when it comes to climate change: mitigation, adaptation, or suffering. The more mitigation we do, the less adaptation will be needed, and the less suffering there will be. And there are things here for each one of us to do. Remember how it all starts with polluting human activities. We can advance environmentally responsible policies and practices at our institutions. We can contribute to improving emergency preparedness and response efforts. Nobody wants to contribute to suffering, but suffering is already happening. And we can document this suffering in a manner that increases awareness and informs solutions. So it's up to you now. What are you going to do to be part of the solution? Thank you.